They say time heals everything, but that's not true. Time doesn't heal what you never had the chance to confront. Time doesn't close wounds that were stitched shut with silence. I'm 82 years old now, and I've carried this story for over 7 decades, a story no one in this town dared to speak of. Not at the dinner table, not at church, not even at the gravesite where a headstone still waits for a body that never returned. My name is Margaret Jean Linton, but these days, most people just call me Miss Maggie. I live alone in a small house just outside the old part of town, Oak Hollow, Tennessee, a place where the steeples still rise higher than the trees and the pews stay full on Sunday, even if the sins inside them would drown a city. If you're hearing my voice, I hope you'll listen closely. I hope you'll stay with me to the end. And if you do, please, tell me where you're from in the comments below. Let me know if this story is reaching beyond the red dirt roads of this town. And if you can, like the video, subscribe. Because every click, every name I read gives me strength to speak louder about the things that were once whispered and buried. I was born in 1942. Back then, the world was black and white. Women wore gloves to grocery stores, and girls were told to sit up straight and never ask questions. I had a sister. Her name was Ella May. She was 4 years older than me, with thick, curly black hair and a smile that could stop a grown man in his tracks. Ella May was the sun to my shadow. Everyone adored her, especially the men, especially one man. His name was Pastor Whitmore. He was new to town then. Came from somewhere in the Carolinas, tall and charming with eyes that didn't blink enough. He had a way of making folks feel seen, like when he looked at you, you mattered. Mama said he was a gift from God. Daddy said he was too clean-cut to trust, but nobody ever listened to Daddy when it came to church matters. Pastor Whitmore had a shiny car, sky blue Buick with a silver cross hanging from the rear view. He liked to drive around town, hand out candy to the children, visit the sick, offer prayers. And sometimes he asked the teenage girls to help clean the church after service, said he was raising them up in the ways of the Lord, said it was a blessing to be near the altar during the week. The summer I turned 10, Ella May had just turned 14. She'd grown taller, started wearing Mama's perfume, and the boys had started to notice. So did the pastor. One afternoon after service, he asked her to stay behind to help reorganize hymnals. Mama beamed with pride. "The Lord's calling on her, you see," she told the neighbors. I watched from the window as Ella May got into his car. I remember that blue Buick driving off slow down the gravel road. That was the last time I saw my sister. That evening, when she didn't come home, Mama said she must have stayed late to help. By nightfall, Daddy was pacing the floor. By morning, the sheriff was at our door. The pastor said he dropped her off just outside the house, said maybe she ran away, that maybe Ella May wasn't as innocent as folks thought. But I knew my sister. She would never run away without telling me. We shared everything, dreams, secrets, even our hiding spot under the porch where we'd trade storybooks and whisper about leaving Oak Hollow for good one day. But she left without her shoes, without her diary, without her blue ribbon, her favorite one. And Mama never asked too many questions after that. She cried, she cooked, she prayed, but she never looked the pastor in the eye again. And me? I stayed quiet. Because even at 10 years old, I knew something was wrong. I knew something had happened. I knew the church was hiding something. But when you're just a little girl in a God-fearing town, your voice is worth less than a hymn book page. I'm telling this now not because I want justice. Justice is a ghost in places like this. I'm telling it because silence is heavy. It rots you from the inside out. And if there's even one girl out there who hears this and realizes her voice matters, then maybe Ella May didn't disappear for nothing. The truth was buried, but not forever. Because one rainy night in 1973, something happened. I was 31, married, a mother myself, and I found something in the church basement that made my knees go weak and my heart beat like a war drum. I'll tell you what I found. But first, let me take you back to the beginning. I was born in Oak Hollow, Tennessee, the kind of town that looks like it was pressed out of a Bible page. One church, one school, one grocery store with chipped floors, and a bell over the door that jingled every time someone came in. Everyone knew each other's names, sins, and stories, though most of those were kept quiet unless whispered in prayer circles. We lived in a small wooden house on Willow Creek Road, 3 rooms total, one for Mama and Daddy, one for me and Ella May, and one that served as a kitchen, dining room, and everything in between. We didn't have much, but Mama kept things tidy. She had a way of folding sheets like they were sacred. Daddy was a quiet man, a carpenter who smelled of cedar and turpentine. He worked sunup to sundown, came home covered in sawdust and calluses, and didn't speak much unless he had something worth saying. And then there was Mama, the kind of woman who could pray the rain away or pull it down if she wanted to. She believed in appearances, in respectability, in never letting the neighbors see you cry. I think she thought pain was something you could scrub off if you just kept the floors clean enough, but it was Ella May who lit up the place. She was the sparkle in the dust, always singing, always twirling through the room like she had music inside her bones. She called me her shadow, said she was the sun and I was the moon and we needed each other to make sense. I followed her everywhere, at school, in the yard, even to church choir when I was still too young to join. She was my whole world. Our town didn't have much for girls. You went to school, learned to sew, maybe helped your mother bake if you were lucky. Most dreams ended at the county line. Ella May, though, she had this fire. She talked about Nashville, about becoming a singer, about writing songs that made people cry in the best kind of way. Sometimes at night, we'd sit under the porch with a flashlight, and she'd read lyrics she'd scribbled on notebook paper. They were good, too. Honest. Pure. She had talent. Even Daddy said so, and Daddy didn't hand out compliments like candy. But something started to shift the year she turned 14. The boys who used to pull her braids started staring too long. The men in town started complimenting her figure more than her singing. Mama told her to wear longer skirts. Daddy started fixing things with a little more noise when certain men came to visit. Ella May laughed it off, said they were just being nice. But I saw her face when she'd close her bedroom door. I saw her peel off her smile like a costume. There was a sadness under her ribs that I didn't understand yet. A warning, maybe. A premonition. That same year, we got a new preacher, Reverend Charles Whitmore. Oak Hollow was small enough that when someone new arrived, it was like a rock dropping into still water. Everybody felt the ripple. He was younger than most expected, mid-30s, I think, with wavy hair and shiny shoes. Said he came from Charlotte, but no one ever really asked why he left. We were just happy to have someone who could fill a pew and quote scripture like poetry. He had a voice like butter, smooth and warm and always just on the edge of tears. The women in town adored him. Mama said he was touched by God. He'd cry when he talked about salvation, raise his hands to the ceiling like he could see heaven just a few inches above the rafters. He always smiled too long and shook hands a little too tightly, but people just called that charisma. The first time he came to our house was after a Sunday service. He brought over a pie, peach, I remember, and said he just wanted to check on the Linton girls. He complimented Mama on her cooking, Daddy on his carpentry, and Ella May on her God-given glow. He looked at me too, but not the same way. Ella May was polite, thanked him, laughed at his jokes, but I saw how stiff her shoulders were. I saw how she wiped her hands on her dress over and over, even though they weren't dirty. That night, when we were in bed, she whispered to me, "He gives me the chills." I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I never forgot it. The pastor started coming around more after that, said he wanted to give Ella May church responsibility. First it was helping arrange hymnals, then it was helping with the children's choir, then it was private Bible study, just the two of them. Mama thought it was a blessing, said the Lord was working through him to shape Ella May into a proper woman of faith. Daddy didn't say much, just stared out the window a little longer than usual whenever the pastor's Buick rolled up the drive. I was just a little thing, watching all of this from behind doorways and under tables. But kids notice what adults don't want to see. I saw how his smile lingered a little too long, how his fingers brushed Ella Mae's shoulder just a little too low, how her light started to dim, one flicker at a time. She stopped singing around the house, stopped writing songs, stopped reading to me at night. The sun in my sky was fading and nobody seemed to notice. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't want to. It's hard to explain what it feels like when the person who shines brightest in your world starts to go dim. At first, you think maybe you did something wrong. Maybe they're mad at you or tired or just need space. But then days turn into weeks, and you realize it's something deeper, something darker. Ella Mae started flinching at small sounds, a door creak, a heavy step on the porch. Her smile, once wide and full of teeth, became a thin, polite thing that disappeared the moment no one was looking. She kept her eyes down when the pastor came around. She kept her door locked when she was home. She began to whisper at night, not to me, but to herself, like she was praying or trying to remember who she was. I didn't understand everything then, not completely, but I knew something was wrong. And I started watching more closely, listening harder. One afternoon, I followed her. She had told Mama she was going to help Pastor Whitmore clean the back rooms of the church. There'd been a flood from a busted pipe, she said. I told Mama I'd walk with her to the church steps, just to be helpful. But instead, I lingered behind, quiet like a mouse, staying in the shadow of the trees as she walked down the road. When she got there, he was already waiting. Buick polished, engine running, white shirt too crisp. He leaned against the passenger door and opened it for her like he was a gentleman. I couldn't hear what he said, but Ella Mae didn't smile. She paused like she was forcing her feet to move forward. Then she got in. They drove off toward the side entrance, the one that led to the basement of the church. That night she came home late, clothes a little wrinkled, her hands stained with something dark. When Mama asked how it went, she said, "Just mopping." Then she went straight to bed and cried so softly I only heard it because I pressed my ear to the door. A few days later, she started wearing long sleeves, even in the heat. She'd get real quiet whenever anyone mentioned the pastor. Daddy noticed. One night after she went to bed, I heard him ask Mama, "Is there something wrong with that preacher?" Mama just sighed and said, "He's a man of God, Virgil. Don't go accusing folks just 'cause your gut don't like them." I wanted to scream. I wanted to say what I saw, what I felt, but I was just 10, a girl. What did I know about men of God? And then there was the night it happened. I was up late, couldn't sleep. The crickets were loud, the wind sharp, and I'd had a nightmare about Ella Mae being buried under the church floor. Silly, right? But it didn't feel silly then. I crept out of bed, tiptoed down the hall, thinking maybe I'd crawl into bed with her like we used to when the thunder got bad. But her bed was empty. I panicked, ran to the kitchen, then the porch. The front door was ajar, screen swinging gently in the breeze. And there, down at the bottom of the driveway, I saw the blue Buick. It was parked crooked, like it had pulled in fast. The headlights were off. The driver's door was open. I couldn't see Ella Mae, but I knew she was there. I knew she'd gone to him again. I waited. I waited for what felt like hours. And then the engine started, and the car rolled slowly away into the dark. She didn't come home that night, or the next. The sheriff came 2 days later, said there was no sign of a struggle, said Ella Mae must have run off with a boy. Teenage girls do that sometimes. Mama clutched her Bible like it would collapse if she let go. Daddy sat stone-faced, jaw clenched, not saying a word. I tried to speak, to tell them about the Buick, about the late nights, the sleeves in summer, but my throat locked up, and no one asked me. They found her shoes weeks later by the riverbank, lined up neatly like someone had taken them off with care. No footprints, no note. Just those worn, faded sandals with the broken strap she refused to throw away. The pastor said he was grieving with the family. He cried in church, wiped his tears with a monogrammed handkerchief, and spoke of temptation, of forgiveness, of letting go and letting God. People patted him on the back after the sermon. Women brought him pies. Some whispered that maybe Ella May had been troubled, fast, wild in a quiet kind of way. I hated them. But most of all, I hated myself for not speaking louder, for not grabbing her hand the last time I saw her and begging her not to go, for not doing something, anything, other than standing by and watching her walk away. The light in our house went out after that. Mama stopped singing, Daddy stopped smiling, I stopped being a child, and the pastor, he kept preaching. After Ella May vanished, everything in our house became quiet, too quiet like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mama kept cooking for 4, even though only 3 of us sat at the table. Daddy fixed the same cabinet door 3 times just to keep his hands busy. And me? I learned how to disappear without leaving the room. I stayed in my head a lot after that, made up stories where Ella May had run off to Nashville like she always said she would, singing in bright cafes and dancing in front of crowds that clapped until their hands turned red. I imagined she'd send me a letter one day telling me to pack my bags and come join her. But deep down, I knew. Even at 10 years old, I knew she was gone. Not just missing, not just lost, gone. The worst part wasn't even the silence. It was the pretending. The way the whole town swallowed the lie that Ella May had run off, that she'd just abandoned everything, her family, her little sister, her dreams. No one dared question the pastor, and if they did it behind cupped hands and sealed windows. He still drove that blue Buick through town like it had wings, still preached with trembling lips and 2 soft eyes, still walked up to our porch every Sunday after church, handed Mama a slice of scripture and a nod of sympathy. The first time I was alone with him after Ella May disappeared, I was 11. Mama had gone to help a neighbor deliver a baby, and Daddy was out on a carpentry job. The pastor knocked on our door with a plate of muffins and said, "I just wanted to check on the little one." I stood there, frozen. I didn't want to let him in. Every nerve in my body told me to run, to hide, to scream. But girls weren't raised to slam doors in a pastor's face. He sat at our kitchen table, folded his hands neatly, and asked me how I was holding up. I didn't answer. I just stared at the plate of muffins. "You know, your sister was very special to God," he said, voice low and syrupy. "But some souls, they're just too bright for this world." I felt like I was sinking into the floor, like the air around me had thickened. He reached across the table and placed his hand on mine. His fingers were cold, heavy. I flinched, but he didn't move, just stared into me with those unblinking eyes and said, "And you, little one, you remind me of her. You're going to grow up just as beautiful." That was the first time I knew fear, not just as a feeling, but as a presence, like something living behind my ribs, breathing down my neck. After that day, he started coming more often, always with an excuse, checking in, offering guidance, bringing scripture. And Mama, she welcomed it, said God was sending us comfort in our time of grief, but his eyes never looked at Mama, they always landed on me. One afternoon, I was in the yard picking wildflowers when his Buick pulled up. He stepped out with a Bible in one hand and a box of lemon cookies in the other. "Your mother told me you've been struggling with your verses," he said. "Thought I might give you a little lesson." I didn't want to go with him, but Mama was watching through the window and nodded. So I climbed into that car, and my heart felt like it was wrapped in barbed wire. We didn't go to the church. We didn't even go far. He parked behind the old cotton shed near the edge of town where nobody ever walked anymore. He opened the Bible and read a few lines about obedience, about daughters submitting, about being pure in the eyes of God. Then he closed it and looked at me. And then, I won't describe everything. Not because I can't, because I remember it too well. The smell of his cologne, something bitter and sharp. The feel of the vinyl seat pressing into my back, the sound of birds outside, singing like nothing was wrong. When it was over, he told me not to cry. said if I cried, Mama would be punished, that God only punished disobedient girls. I walked home in silence, blood in my socks, shame in my lungs. I didn't eat dinner that night, didn't speak, just curled up in Ella Mae's empty bed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for morning like it might come and undo everything. But morning didn't bring peace. It brought more pretending. I wanted to tell Mama I did. I thought maybe if I told her what he did, she'd finally see. She'd believe me. But when I opened my mouth, the words wouldn't come out. My tongue felt like it was made of stone. And her eyes, they were already so tired, so sad. I didn't want to break her any more than she already was. So I kept quiet. The visits continued. Not every day, but often enough that I learned to stop flinching. Learned how to leave my body, drift somewhere above the trees, count the clouds while it happened. I became very good at pretending. At school, I got quieter. Teachers called me moody. Girls whispered that I was strange. Boys didn't look at me the way they looked at other girls. Maybe they sensed the rot under my skin. I felt like a ghost walking through a life that didn't belong to me. Every now and then, Mama would find me crying in my sleep or come across my clothes torn, my hands shaking. She'd ask, gently, if I was sick, and I'd nod, because telling the truth meant tearing open a wound that nobody in Oak Hollow was ready to look at. I stopped sitting in church. Couldn't stand the sight of that pulpit. Couldn't bear the way he'd preach about love while looking right at me. And nobody ever questioned it. Not really, because girls like me didn't have voices. Not when men like him were holding the microphone. The older I got, the worse it became. Not just the acts themselves, but the way the world kept turning like nothing was wrong. By the time I was 12, Pastor Whitmore didn't bother with the Bible anymore. He didn't knock. He just showed up when Mama was out. Walked right into the house like he lived there. Sometimes I'd hear his footsteps before I even saw him. That sound, those polished shoes on the creaky wooden floors, still makes my stomach turn. He became more possessive, more certain I wouldn't tell. And he was right. I didn't. He told me I was chosen, told me God had plans for girls like me, girls who could keep a secret, and I believed him, because no one ever told me otherwise. Mama was always too busy, always tired. Daddy had taken on extra work to keep food on the table. I think deep down, they both knew something was wrong, but knowing and admitting are two different things. And in a town like Oak Hollow, you don't accuse the man with the collar and the keys to the kingdom. I learned how to disappear inside myself. I'd count things, floorboards, window panes, cracks in the ceiling, just to stay anchored while my body went numb. Sometimes I imagined I was somewhere else, flying above the trees, deep underwater where no one could touch me. I became good at escaping without ever moving. At school, I stopped raising my hand. My grades dropped. The teachers said I lacked focus, that I seemed emotionally distant. No one asked why. No one asked what had changed. My period started at 13. The first time I saw the blood, I thought something inside me had finally broken, that maybe my body had found a way to get rid of what he left behind. But it didn't stop anything. In fact, he became more careful after that, more secretive, more cruel. He told me to be grateful, said I was lucky, that God had made me especially soft for a reason. One time, after it happened, I stayed curled up in the woods behind our house for hours. I didn't even realize it had rained until I looked down and saw the earth soaked through my skirt. I remember lying there, wondering what would happen if I just stayed, if the trees would cover me, if the roots would pull me in and keep me safe. But I always came back. I always cleaned up, smiled when Mama looked my way, ate my supper, said my prayers. That was the worst part, how normal everything became, how easy it was to carry this weight in silence. Nobody saw me, not really, and the ones who might have, well, they looked away. By the time I was 14, my body had changed. I'd grown curves I didn't ask for, hips and breasts that made men look twice and women whisper. The older women at church started making comments. "She's filling out," one said to Mama during Sunday service. Looks just like her sister, another said with a nod that made my skin crawl. Mama beamed, said, "The Lord makes no mistakes." And I wanted to scream. But what's the point of screaming when no one hears you? I started writing letters to Ella May in a notebook I kept hidden under the floorboard. I'd tell her everything, what he did, how I felt, how alone I was. I imagined her reading them from wherever she was. I imagined she'd find a way to come back and get me. She never did, of course. But writing helped, even if only a little. Then came the night I thought might kill me. He showed up after dark. Mama had gone to visit a friend. Daddy was asleep on the porch with a beer bottle rolling between his boots. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when the screen door creaked open. I turned around, and he was already in the room. No words that time. No Bible. No cookies. Just the look in his eyes, cold and hard like he wasn't pretending anymore. I tried to run. He grabbed my wrist. I screamed, loud and sharp, and for a second I thought maybe, just maybe, Daddy would hear me. But no one came. Not even God. When it was over, I couldn't move. I lay there on the floor, knees scraped, lip bleeding, ribs aching. He stood over me, adjusted his tie, and whispered, "You should be grateful. I didn't do worse." Then he left. I stayed on that floor until sunrise. And when the light hit the window, I got up, cleaned the blood, burned the dress. And I stopped writing letters after that. I stopped dreaming altogether. I didn't know I was pregnant at first. I thought maybe I was just sick. I'd been dizzy, throwing up in the mornings, couldn't stand the smell of eggs or the sound of silverware clinking. My chest ached. My body felt foreign. I thought maybe it was punishment, that somehow my body had finally turned on me for letting all of this happen. I was 15 when the truth hit me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like the movies. It was quiet, slow, creeping, like a shadow stretching longer each day. I remember standing in front of the mirror, pulling up my nightgown, running my hand over the soft curve of my belly that hadn't been there before. I remember whispering to myself, "No, no, no, no," over and over again like I could undo it with enough denial. But it didn't go away. I started hiding my body under big clothes, sat hunched over at the dinner table, walked with my arms folded tight. Every week that passed, I felt like I was running out of time, like the truth was a flame edging closer to the curtains. Mama noticed first. She didn't say anything, not at first, but I saw the way her eyes lingered on my waist, the way she sniffed at my laundry, the way she started checking the trash bin in the bathroom like she was looking for answers. Then one morning, just as the sun cracked the sky, she came into my room and stood by my bed. "Get up," she said. Her voice was flat, cold. She didn't ask. She didn't beg. She told me, and I followed. She didn't take me to a doctor. She took me to a neighbor woman, Miss Adeline, who had delivered babies for women who didn't have wedding rings. I laid there in her musty back room, legs shaking, while Adeline pressed her hand against my belly and said, "She's about 4 months." I stared at the ceiling fan and waited for the world to split in two. When we got home, Mama didn't speak for hours. Then, while she was folding laundry, she said, "Tell me who." I said nothing. She asked again, this time louder, and I just stood there, fists clenched, throat thick, heart begging me to say the name. But I couldn't. Not because I didn't want to, because I already knew what would happen if I did. Finally, she grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me, something she'd never done before. "Tell me who did this to you," she screamed. And I whispered it. Pastor Whitmore. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. She stepped back like I'd slapped her. Her face, God, her face, twisted into something I'd never seen. Not pain, not rage, something else. Something like a truth she already knew but couldn't afford to believe. "You're lying," she said. "Don't you dare speak that man's name in this house." I tried to explain. I begged. I told her about the visits, the car, the shed, the pain. But it didn't matter. She'd already chosen her truth. "You don't speak of this again," she said. "To anyone, do you understand?" I nodded. Because what else was I supposed to do? That night, Daddy came home late, smelled like liquor and sawdust. Mama told him I was pregnant. Didn't say how, just said it happened, that I was wild like my sister. Daddy didn't speak. He just stared at me. His face was blank, unreadable. Then he picked up his toolbox and walked back out into the dark. He didn't come back for 2 days. When he did, he didn't mention the baby, didn't look at my belly, didn't speak to me at all. It was like I'd become invisible, like I wasn't even his daughter anymore. The pastor came to the house again a week later. Mama gave him lemonade on the porch, smiled like nothing had changed. I watched from the window, hand over my stomach, wondering if anyone in this world would ever see me for what I really was. A child, scared and broken, carrying a burden no child should bear. Later that evening, Mama handed me a stack of old baby clothes wrapped in brown paper. "You'll keep it," she said. "You'll raise it, and you'll never speak of where it came from." Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "And you'll stop going to church. We'll say you're ill. The Lord understands." She was protecting herself, the family, the name, not me, never me. From then on, I was no longer Margaret Jean, the quiet daughter. I became the house's dirty secret. I was allowed to exist as long as I stayed small, silent, and invisible. I stopped going outside, stopped looking in mirrors, stopped writing in my journal. There was no point. The words had turned to ash in my throat. I wasn't just carrying a child. I was carrying every silence, every secret, every sin that this town had refused to name. The months passed like a fog, slow, heavy, and choking. I barely remember them in detail, only flashes. The smell of boiled cabbage, the sound of a rocking chair creaking in the dark, the sharp pull in my back when I tried to sleep on my side. I turned 16 with a belly swollen under a borrowed dress. No cake, no song, just Mama placing a folded flannel blanket on my bed and whispering, "It's coming soon." She wouldn't take me to a hospital. Said we couldn't risk the questions. Said too many people in this town had long memories and sharp tongues. So she arranged for Miss Adeline again, the same woman who had told us what I already knew. The night it happened, there was a storm. Thunder cracked the sky like it was breaking in two. Rain pelted the tin roof, drowning out my screams. I labored on an old mattress in the back room, sweat pooling in the hollow of my spine, hands gripping the sheets so tight my knuckles bled. Mama was there. So was Adeline. No one else. Not Daddy. Not a friend. No one to hold my hand or wipe my brow or whisper, "You're strong, you're brave, it's almost over." Just pain, raw, primal, endless pain. It lasted hours. I thought I might die. Part of me wanted to, and then all at once there was a cry. Not mine. His, a boy, my son. They placed him on my chest, slick and squirming, fists clenched like he already knew the world would not be kind to him. He had a full head of dark hair and a birthmark on his shoulder, the shape of a crescent moon. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like hope. I cried when I saw him, not out of joy, not entirely out of pain, but because I realized that everything had changed, that my body was no longer mine, that nothing I'd lost would ever return, but that he, this tiny breathing thing, was mine. I named him Samuel, after the prophet, the one who heard God in the dark. Mama said we wouldn't put that on the birth certificate, said we'd tell people I was helping raise a cousin's child, said if I slipped and called him son, she'd remind me to fix it. The lie became the lullaby. The days that followed were quiet. Samuel cried often, his lungs strong, his will stronger. He had eyes like Ella May, eyes that watched me like he already understood things I hadn't said out loud. I loved him fiercely, but I feared myself, feared that I might resent him, that I might see Whitmore's shadow in his smile. But I didn't, not once. When I held him, I didn't see the man who hurt me. I saw the girl I used to be. I saw a second chance. I fed him with shaky hands, sang him broken lullabies, stayed up all night just to make sure he was breathing. I was terrified of losing him, of anyone taking him, of history repeating itself. One night, a few weeks after he was born, I stood by his cradle and made a vow. I promised that I would never let what happened to me happen to him. I promised that no man would touch him in hate, that no church would silence his pain, that no lie would be more important than his truth. I didn't care what Mama said or what this town thought. I didn't care about salvation or sin or saving face. Samuel was mine, and I would become fire if that's what it took to keep him safe. From that moment on, I wasn't just a girl anymore. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't even just a mother. I was a shield. I waited until Samuel was almost a year old before I tried to run. By then, he could sit up on his own, laugh when I tickled his belly, reach for my face when I leaned in close. He'd started saying, "Mama, mama, ma." And I didn't care if it wasn't real speech. It was mine. His voice. My name. That was enough. But I knew it wouldn't last. I knew eventually he'd start asking questions. Who was his father? Why didn't he have siblings? Why did people in town glance at us and then look away? I couldn't raise him in Oak Hollow, not in that house, not under that name, not while the man who destroyed me stood behind a pulpit every Sunday preaching about grace. So I started planning, quietly, carefully. I'd sneak bread rolls from the kitchen and hide them in an old coffee tin buried behind the barn. I stashed coins wherever I could, under floorboards, behind the cupboard, sewn into the hem of my coat. Every penny mattered. I studied bus routes in the back pages of the newspaper, looked for towns with names that felt soft on the tongue. Hopewell, Willow Springs, Harmony. I told myself I only needed one good night, one small window of silence, and we'd be gone. That window came late one Saturday. Mama had taken ill, some stomach bug, and was asleep with a wet rag on her forehead. Daddy had gone to play cards with the men at the gas station. The house was still. Samuel was napping in a basket I'd padded with a pillow and soft towels. I wrapped him tight, kissed his forehead, whispered, "Just hold on," and grabbed the bag I'd hidden in the closet. I didn't go out the front. I slipped through the kitchen door, past the porch steps, down the gravel path, and out into the woods. We made it as far as the edge of the neighbor's cornfield before I heard the sound of tires on gravel. The Buick. I froze. The pastor stepped out of the car like he'd been waiting, like he knew. His voice was calm, too calm. "Margaret," he said, "where do you think you're going?" I tightened my grip on Samuel. He whimpered. "I'm leaving," I said. "We're not coming back." He laughed, a low, knowing sound. "You think the world out there wants girls like you, mothers at 16, trash from a nowhere town? You think they'll welcome you with open arms?" I took a step back. "I don't care what the world does. I just need to get away from you." His smile dropped. He stepped closer. "I let you live," he said, his voice dark now, almost growling. "I could have buried you in that field years ago. No one would have asked a single question. I let you live. And now you want to run?" Samuel started to cry, loud, scared. His tiny hands balled into fists, and something in me snapped. All those years of silence, of fear, of being made small, it burst like a dam inside me. I screamed, not for help, not for mercy. I screamed like a mother. "Get away from us." I turned and ran through the field, over thorns, past the old fence. I didn't stop, even when Samuel wailed louder, even when my legs burned and the ground scraped my ankles raw. But I didn't get far. A hand grabbed my coat, yanked me backward. He didn't hit me. That wasn't his style. He just looked at me, full of disgust. "You've lost your mind," he said, "and I won't let you ruin everything." Then, like nothing had happened, he brushed off his jacket and walked back to his car. I thought he might tell the sheriff, tell Mama, tell the whole town I'd gone crazy. But he didn't, because he knew something I didn't, yet. He didn't need to stop me with fists or guns. He just needed me to believe there was nowhere to go. That night, I sat by the window while Samuel slept, and I stared at the stars, whispering to Ella May, I tried, but I couldn't. But in that whisper, something shifted. I didn't break. I started planning again, because now I knew what not to do. I knew how fast I had to be. I knew not to go through the woods, and most of all, I knew that he was scared enough to chase me, scared enough to lie, which meant I had something he couldn't control anymore. Hope. Hope is a funny thing. Sometimes it's loud and blazing like fire. Other times it's just a flicker, barely a spark, but enough to keep going. After that night in the cornfield, I kept going. I walked softer, hid deeper, but I didn't stop planning. I couldn't. Samuel was growing fast. By 18 months, he was toddling around the porch, calling me Mama loud and proud like the word had never been forbidden, and I didn't correct him anymore. I didn't hide it. If Mama heard, she pretended not to. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she finally saw the truth carved into his little face. But the pastor hadn't forgotten. He started coming again. Less often, but heavier. Heavier with words, with threats, with that same poisonous calm he always wore like a second skin. One night, he waited until Daddy was out back chopping firewood. I was sweeping the kitchen. Samuel was playing with a wooden spoon in the corner. And then the door creaked, and there he was, standing there like a shadow that had learned how to smile. He closed the door behind him. I miss the obedient girl you used to be, he said. What happened to her? I said nothing, just kept sweeping. I didn't meet his eyes. You think the boy changes anything? He asked, voice lower now. He won't protect you. You think the world will see you as a mother? They'll see a harlot, a liar, a disgrace. Still, I didn't speak. That's when he stepped closer, reached for Samuel. Maybe I need to have a word with him. Something inside me cracked open like thunder. I dropped the broom and shoved his hand away. You touch him, I said, and I swear to God I will bury you with my own hands. He stared at me, not with anger, not even surprise, with something else, fear, just for a second. Then he turned and left. I locked the door behind him, and I didn't sleep that night. I lay there beside Samuel, my body trembling, staring at the ceiling, thinking, this is it. This is war. That week I started keeping a knife under my pillow, just in case. And then came the miracle I didn't expect. Her name was Miss Lila. She ran the sewing shop 2 streets over. A widow in her 60s, always wore a brooch with a tiny bluebird on it. She'd once hemmed one of my dresses, and we'd chatted while she worked. About the weather, about fabrics, nothing deep, but something about her eyes stuck with me. They were kind and watchful, like she saw more than she let on. One afternoon, I walked by her shop with Samuel, and she stepped outside. Margaret, she said, her voice sweet but firm, why don't you come in for some tea? I hesitated. Then I nodded. Inside, she poured 2 cups, handed Samuel a biscuit, and sat across from me with a gaze that felt like sunlight and thunder all at once. I know who the father is, she said softly. My blood ran cold. You don't need to say a word, she continued. I've lived in this town long enough to know what men hide behind pulpits. Tears filled my eyes. I hadn't even spoken. But somehow, she knew. I lost a sister to a man like him, she whispered, and I swore I'd never be a bystander again. I cried then, hard. The kind of cry that doesn't make noise, just shakes through your bones. She reached across the table and took my hand. You need a way out, she said. I nodded. I have a cousin in Tallahassee. She runs a home for women like you, girls with children. It's not much, but it's safe. She gave me a piece of paper with an address, a name, and a number. Told me there was a bus that left every Thursday at 6 a.m. from the next town over, one Whitmore didn't frequent. I can't come with you, she said, but I can drive you to the station. I hugged her. For the first time in years, I let myself be held. That night, I packed quietly, no suitcase, just one bag, diapers, a bottle, my letters to Ella May, the baby blanket Mama had sewn, even if it was soaked in silence. I didn't tell Mama. I didn't tell Daddy. I didn't even write a note. Some things don't need explaining when your whole life has already been erased. The morning of our escape came on the quietest Thursday I'd ever known. The sky was still black when I rose from bed. Samuel stirred but didn't wake. I pressed my lips to his forehead, whispered, "Today we go. Today we start over," and wrapped him tight against me in the sling I'd sewn from one of Ella May's old bed sheets. I dressed quickly, layers that didn't look suspicious but could keep us warm if the bus was late. I didn't take much, just that one bag, heavy with the small life I'd built from broken pieces. The sound of the zipper sliding shut was like a prayer. I moved slowly like a shadow. The house creaked beneath my steps, but no one woke. I paused at Mama's door. For a second, I thought about knocking, about saying goodbye, about telling her that her silence had hurt more than the pastor's hands ever did. But I didn't. Instead, I turned, walked out the back, and disappeared into the early fog like a ghost escaping its own grave. Miss Lila was already waiting. Her old Dodge was parked under the pecan tree, engine quietly humming. She didn't speak, just reached over, opened the passenger door, and nodded. We drove in silence, the road humming beneath us like a lullaby. Samuel slept the entire ride. I watched him in the rearview mirror, his tiny chest rising and falling, his hands curled against his cheeks. He looked like peace, like possibility. We reached the bus station as the first blush of dawn painted the sky. It was smaller than I imagined, just a little building with peeling paint and a vending machine that rattled when the wind hit it right. The kind of place where people didn't look at each other. The kind of place you went when you didn't want to be seen. Miss Lila walked me to the platform. "You remember the name?" she asked. I nodded. "You got the paper?" I patted my coat pocket. "Right here." She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes filled with something I still can't name. Not quite sorrow, not quite pride. "Don't ever come back," she whispered. "I won't." The bus rolled in with a long hiss and a low rumble. A few people climbed off. A few climbed on. Nobody paid us any mind. And that was the first time in my life I felt invisible in a way that made me feel safe. I turned to Miss Lila. "Thank you." She pulled me into a hug and held on tight. Then she let go and walked away without looking back. I stepped onto that bus with my son in my arms and my heart pounding like it wanted to tear through my chest. The driver didn't even ask for ID, just took the crumpled bills and handed me 2 tickets, one for me, one for Samuel. We sat near the back. I pulled the curtain closed and leaned my head against the cold window. As the town disappeared behind us, oak trees thinning, houses fading, the church steeple growing smaller and smaller, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I felt empty and full all at once, like I'd left something behind that never really belonged to me, like the road ahead might finally offer more than shadows. Samuel woke up an hour later. He blinked up at me, confused, then smiled. I held him close and whispered, "We're free." Not loud, not certain, but enough. Tallahassee smelled different. The air was thick with pine and humidity, and everything moved just a little slower, like the world was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I didn't know a soul there. I didn't have a real plan beyond the folded paper Miss Lila had pressed into my hand. But I had Samuel. I had my bag. And I had a quiet kind of determination that came from surviving things no one should. The address led me to a red brick house at the edge of the city, nestled between a thrift store and an old Methodist church. The sign above the door said, "Willow Grace Home." A woman answered when I knocked. Her name was Lucinda. She was in her 40s, hair pulled back in a loose scarf, eyes tired but kind. "You must be Margaret," she said, as if she'd been expecting me for years. She took one look at Samuel, smiled softly, and opened the door wider. Inside, it smelled like cornbread and lemon soap. There were other girls there, some younger than me, some older, all carrying stories written in silence across their shoulders. Some had babies already. Some were still waiting. No one asked questions. No one stared. Lucinda showed me to a small room with a single bed and a crib already waiting. "You're safe now," she said. "Sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure the rest out." That night, I cried. Not from fear, not from grief, from release. For the first time in years, I didn't sleep with one eye open. I didn't flinch at footsteps. I didn't count the seconds between creaks in the hallway. Samuel lay in the crib beside me, his hand reaching through the slats to touch my fingers. We had nothing, and yet we had everything. The days at Willow Grace passed in a rhythm that slowly mended me. There were chores, laundry, cooking, sweeping, and classes on how to find work, how to read financial forms, how to build something from scratch. There were diapers and bottles and sleepless nights. But there was also laughter. Soft, healing laughter shared over chipped mugs of weak coffee and whispered dreams about the future. I got a job at a small diner down the road. The owner, Mrs. Emery, didn't care about my past. She cared that I showed up on time, wore clean clothes, and treated customers kindly. I worked the morning shift while another girl at the home watched Samuel. In the evenings, I took care of her baby so she could do her shifts. We helped each other survive. Samuel grew fast. He was walking by 18 months, talking by 2. He loved music. Any kind didn't matter. I'd hum old hymns while folding laundry, and he'd dance like the floor was made of sunshine. His laugh was the sound I'd never known I needed. People in town began to know us, not as that girl and that baby, but as Margaret and Samuel. We were just people. And that was a kind of miracle all its own. Sometimes at night, the memories would creep in. The pastor's voice, Mama's silence, the weight of that house in Oak Hollow. I'd wake in a cold sweat, hand reaching for Samuel, needing to make sure he was still there, still safe. He always was, and each time I'd press a kiss to his forehead and whisper, "I've got you, baby. I've got you." I started writing again, not letters to Ella May, but journals. Long pages filled with the pieces of me I'd buried, my thoughts, my fears, my hopes for Samuel. I didn't know what would come of them, but writing made the ghosts quieter. One day, I found myself standing outside a bookstore window, staring at a notice taped to the glass. Local Writers Circle. New members welcome. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't walk away. The Writers Circle met on Tuesday evenings in the back of a dusty old bookshop, just a few blocks from the diner. There were 6 of us, mostly women, all of us trying to unearth something from the past. Memories, regrets, stories buried too long. They didn't know my truth, and I didn't tell it. Not then, not in full. But I read them small pieces, stories about loss, about a girl who ran barefoot through the woods, about a mother who loved her child more than her own breath. They listened, they clapped, and none of them asked what was real and what was fiction. That space became a home I didn't know I'd been needing. Samuel was 4 when I met Mr. Harold Thomas. He came into the diner one rainy afternoon, ordered sweet tea and a slice of lemon pie, and left a $10 tip on a $5 check. He came back the next week, sat in the same seat, ordered the same pie. Eventually, he started asking questions, gentle ones, the kind that didn't pry too deep. "How old's your boy? Where'd you grow up? What makes you smile these days?" He was a retired bus driver, widowed young, and lived alone with his cat, had no children, wore suspenders, and always smelled faintly of cedar. Something about him made the air around me softer. He never asked about Samuel's father, never made me explain. Over time, he started walking us home after my shift, me with my hair pinned back, Samuel with a paper hat from the diner. We'd laugh about silly things like how Samuel hated peas or how I burned the cornbread again. It wasn't love in the fairy tale sense. It was quieter, slower, like sunlight through a cracked window. One afternoon, he brought Samuel a toy truck. The next, he helped fix our leaky sink. By the end of the year, we were having dinner together every Thursday, and Samuel had started calling him Mr. H. Dot. But I never told him the truth, not all of it. I told him Samuel's father had left, that we'd had a difficult start, that the town I came from didn't give girls like me second chances. He didn't press. Maybe he knew the rest. Maybe he didn't want to make me bleed to prove it. That year, Samuel started kindergarten. He wore a blue backpack that hung down to his knees and a crooked little smile with 2 front teeth missing. I watched him walk into that classroom, head high, brave as anything, and I thought, he'll never know what I had to crawl through to get him here. I told the school I was a widow. It wasn't true, but it was the closest thing to a kindness I could offer myself. In Tallahassee, I became someone else. Not the preacher's shame, not the girl in the back room with blood on her knees. I was just Margaret Jean Walker, a mother, a waitress, a woman who smiled more than she used to. But the past never really leaves you. Sometimes I'd hear a voice in a crowd that sounded like his. Sometimes I'd see a man in a suit walking toward a church and feel my throat close up. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night gasping, reaching for a child who was already safe and snoring 2 feet away. But I learned how to live beside the ghosts, not to forget them, but to stop letting them drive. I kept the letters I wrote to Ella May in a box under my bed. I never told Samuel who she was or what happened to her. Not then. Maybe not ever. Because even if the truth burned in my bones, I couldn't bear the thought of that fire reaching him. He had friends. He had dreams. He had a life I had bled to give him, and I wasn't going to let the past steal that. Samuel grew into his smile. By the time he was 10, he was all elbows and knees, running through the apartment like a storm with shoes too big and questions too sharp. He asked once, only once, about his father. We were walking home from the library. The air smelled like rain and sidewalk chalk, and he looked up at me with that innocent curiosity that kids don't know how to soften. Did my dad love me? I froze. My throat tightened like a fist. I looked at him. His freckled cheeks, his worn sneakers, the library book tucked under his arm, and I told him the only thing I could live with. Your father wasn't ready to be a dad, but I loved you enough for the both of us. He nodded, like that was enough. And maybe, for him, it was. I knew one day the questions would get harder, but not that day. That day, he reached for my hand, and we walked the rest of the way home in silence, my heart beating with both relief and guilt. Years passed. He became taller than me by 14. He joined the school band, picked up the trumpet, and made friends who filled our small apartment with laughter and noise. Every milestone felt like a victory. His first school dance, his first heartbreak, the first time he told me, with fire in his eyes, that he wanted to go to college. I worked double shifts. I saved every dollar. I kept my promise to protect him, even from the truth. By the time he was 18, he had a full scholarship and a letter from a university in North Carolina. We cried in the driveway the day he left. "I'll call every Sunday," he said, hugging me so tight I could feel his heartbeat against mine. "Don't cry too much, Mama." I did, of course. I cried that whole night, not because I was scared for him, but because he had become everything I prayed he would be. Good, kind, free. He never asked about Oak Hollow. He never asked about the town I never spoke of, the past I never unpacked. And I was grateful, because some truths aren't lessons, they're weights. When he met Olivia, his college sweetheart, I knew she was special. She looked at him like the world started and ended in his eyes. And he looked at her like she was made of second chances. They married 2 years later, in a chapel filled with soft music and yellow flowers. I wore a blue dress and cried through the whole thing. Not because I was sad, but because somehow, against all odds, my son had been allowed to love without fear. When their first child was born, they named her Ella. I nearly collapsed when I heard. "She's named after a great aunt," Samuel told me. "You never knew her, but Dad said you'd love it." I nodded, smiled, held that baby girl in my arms, and felt the past fold in on itself like a closing book. Ella had dark eyes and strong lungs and a stubborn streak already showing at 3 days old, And I looked at her, at Samuel holding her with the same tenderness I once had for him, and I knew the cycle was broken, that my silence had been a wall, that my lies had been a bridge, that somehow the truth I buried had blossomed into a future worth the cost. I never told Samuel the whole story. Even now, as I sit on this porch with my hair silver and my bones aching and the wind whispering through the trees, I don't know if I ever will, because sometimes love isn't confession. Sometimes love is protection. I'm 82 years old now. The days move slower than they used to. My hands tremble when I pour the tea. My knees ache when I climb the porch steps. But my mind, it's sharp, sharper than ever. As if every memory I tried to forget is now lining up to be counted before I go. I sit on this old rocking chair most mornings, listening to the birds and the wind, watching the trees cast long shadows across the yard. Samuel calls every Sunday just like he promised. Ella visits after school with her backpack full of drawings and stories that spill out like sunlight. They don't know what I carry. They see a sweet old woman with a tired smile and gentle eyes. They don't know that inside me lives a girl with dirt under her nails, blood in her socks, and a secret so heavy she couldn't speak it for 60 years. Sometimes I wonder if I should have told him. Samuel. If I should have sat him down and said the words out loud. Told him everything. The pastor, the house, the lie about the cousin's child. But I didn't, because he grew up strong, whole, unburdened. He never flinched when someone touched his shoulder, never woke screaming from dreams he couldn't explain, never learned to walk in silence or sleep with one eye open. I gave him the one thing I never had, safety, and that was enough. People think silence is weakness. They think keeping secrets is cowardice. But sometimes silence is mercy, and sometimes lies are armor. I never told him about the church basement, about how, 30 years after Ella May vanished, I went back to Oak Hollow. It was after Daddy died. Mama had passed years before. I told Samuel I was going to visit an old friend, but really, I went back to bury a ghost. The church looked smaller than I remembered. The pews were gone. The paint chipped. The air inside was thick with dust and mildew. But the basement door was still there. It stuck a little, but I forced it open, and I walked down into the dark. I don't know what I expected. A sign, a scream still echoing on the walls. What I found was worse. A small room, no windows, a lock on the outside, a tattered blanket, a rosary, and carved into the wood of the wall, in jagged, desperate letters, "Help me, E.M." I ran. I ran like that girl in the cornfield, only this time I didn't get caught. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just ran. I never told anyone what I saw, because who would believe me? The pastor had died a decade before, heart attack in his sleep. The town mourned him like a saint. There were flowers and hymns and headlines about his devotion. I let them have their lie, because the truth, the real truth, it's not something you can package in a headline. It's blood on the floor and silence in the pews. It's the way people look the other way because the truth is too damn ugly to hold, and so I held it for them all these years. But I'm tired now, and I want to leave something behind that isn't stained by fear. So if you're listening to this, if my voice is reaching you across time or space or screens, then I ask you to remember one thing. You are not alone. Whatever you survived, whatever you carry, it does not make you unworthy of love. It does not make you broken. It makes you forged, like steel in fire. And if you're a mother or a daughter or a sister, then know this. You don't owe the world your pain to be believed. You don't have to bleed in front of people to prove that you've been cut. Your story matters, even if you never speak it, even if you carry it in silence the way I did. And to the girls still out there, locked in rooms, silenced by fear, dismissed by those who should protect them, hold on. Dig your way out, even if it's with your bare hands, because there is a world waiting for you on the other side, A world where your children will never know the sound of that door locking behind them. A world where their first word is mama, and it means safe. My name is Margaret Jean Walker. I was born in a town that tried to erase me. I lived a life they said I wasn't worthy of. And I am not a hero, but I am here. And that is enough. If you're still listening, tell me where you're from. Just your town, or your state, or your country. Let me know if this story reached your heart. And if it did, give it a like. Each click, each comment, each whisper back into the silence, that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps us going. Thank you.